This is PKF Texas Entrepreneurs Playbook. I'm Russ Capper, this week's guest host, and I'm coming to you from the Gulf Coast Regional Family Forum. And I'm here with Scott Clemons, Partner and Chief Investment Strategist of Brown Brothers Harriman. Scott, welcome to the Playbook.
Good morning, Russ. Thank you for having me.
You bet.
Yeah.
Tell us about your firm.
So Brown Brothers Harriman Company is a rather old firm. We were founded in 1818 as a private partnership, which in 1818 every bank on Wall Street was a private partnership. Okay. What's unique about us today is that we've never changed that ownership structure. So over the past 200 years, one by one, firms have gone public. They've limited their liability in some way. We've retained that unlimited liability structure. So there are 31 people who own the firm outright, no outside capital, no debt on the balance sheet. And those 31 people, all of whom operate the business, carry joint and several unlimited liability for the activities of the business.
My God, so that includes you?
That includes me. It tends to focus the mind. It makes risk management a core competence. And what we really like about it is it really does align the interests of the owner-operators with those of our clients. And every firm has that alignment, but for us it's embedded within the DNA of the ownership structure of the business itself. That's rather special to us.
My goodness, so 1818, so it was like this is a birthday year.
We had a big party, we had a series of big parties last year, had big cakes and celebrated the history of the firm and also the future of the firm. One of our events in New York, we had a guest speaker, George W. Bush, former President Bush, and we had him because his grandfather, Prescott Bush, H.W.'s father, Houston connection here, was a partner of the firm back in the 1930s and the early 1940s. So we celebrate that history, and the challenge, of course, is to be informed and influenced by the history and the legacy without having that legacy dictate what you do. So we have to weave into our business a certain amount of entrepreneurship for our third century, which we've embarked on in 2019.
Wow, how unique that is. I mean, I'm fortunate in just being able to see you speak for about 30 minutes in front of a very smart and interested audience. But does that arrangement, that partner arrangement, I mean, does it sort of affect everything that you are, all the advice you give and the predictions that you give?
It does, because I think if there's a common thread among all of our clients, it's that they, for the most part, they're business people. They're families who have built their wealth through the ownership of a business. And it may have been a generation or two ago. In many cases, the business is still the biggest part of the portfolio. Right. So for those clients to work with other owner-operators, there's a natural resonance there, for one thing. And for a second thing, the owners of Brown Brothers Harriman are also clients. So when I sit in front of a client and I talk about the markets, or I talk about investment strategies or investment solutions or how we're investing, I'm actually talking about my own portfolio as well. So there's another alignment of interest there that's very important to us.
Wow. So a 200-year-old firm, I mean, do you ever get, new money in, new young entrepreneurs who exited?
Yeah, Russ, it's amazing how, and I can't put a number on this because I don't know it off the top of my head, but an increasing number of our clients are young and sometimes delightfully young people in their 20s or 30s, more often than not out of the technology space, who have worked hard and they've gotten lucky and they've had insight and they've monetized an idea and they've taken some money off the table and they've turned to us to help preserve and grow that money, even while they may look for an other business venture. But it's remarkable, and it's also very healthy for our business to have an increasing number of clients who are at the early stages of wealth creation.
Very interesting. So, but I do want to get to some of your perspective on the economy now. It's real interesting right now because I think we're nearing the 10-year anniversary of incredible economic growth. Yeah. And I've heard people say, we're in the 9th inning right now. Yeah. What's your perspective?
So the baseball analogy, we may go into extra innings, if I can extend that. There's no expiration date on an economic cycle. You're right, by the summer of this year, we'll hit the 10-year mark for an economic expansion, which will be a record for the United States of America. Sure. But what's interesting, if you look at the long history, and here's where working for a 200-year-old firm, I think, informs my thinking. In an early era of the Republic, economic cycles looked like agricultural cycles. Economic cycles were measured in months, not quarters or years. Move into the 20th century, they look more like manufacturing cycles or industrial cycles, where inventory was really important. Companies would overbuild inventory, the demand wouldn't be there, that would slow the economy down. Where we are in 2019, we're not agricultural, we're not manufacturing, we're service. What does inventory mean for Google or for Amazon or for Netflix? It's sort of an antiquated concept. It's not gone away altogether, don't get me wrong. And the business cycle hasn't gone away altogether either. But the technological nature of this economy is one in which we don't have to have as frequent cycles as we have had in the past. What's interesting is if you look at the past 3 big economic cycles, what happened on Main Street really started on Wall Street. So in the early 1990s, the banking crisis, which was actually centered here in Texas, the Savings and Loan Association, created an economic recession in the early 1990s. The late 1990s, it was excesses on Wall Street with the dot-com stocks and the bubble and the bust that then followed. And of course, in 2007 and 8, it was excesses in the mortgage market. So it was really financial excesses that drove the economic cycle. So when I step back now and look around the financial world and say, where are the excesses now that might pose a threat to Main Street? You can identify some. Subprime auto loans are problematic. But where there are excesses, they're small enough to not pose the systemic threat that mortgages did 10 years ago. And that says to me that this economic cycle has probably got some legs to it.
Cool. I like that. So you also talk a lot about, economic and personal consumption and sentiment and the role that those play. That sounds huge.
It's pretty straightforward, and I think economics is not rocket science. It's not brain surgery. So I start with the simple observation that personal consumption, all the money that you and I and our fellow Americans spend on a daily basis, accounts for 2/3 of economic activity. It's big. I mean, we're a consumer-led nation.
Sure.
And that's not to be dismissive of the role that government spending plays, or trade, which gets a lot of headlines these days, or business investment, certainly. It's simply to put them in the context of those drivers adding up to 30%, whereas personal consumption is 70%. And that's why I spend a lot of my analysis focused on the health of the consumer. That's a real question about income and wealth, but it's also the psychological question of to what degree are consumers willing to part with those dollars. That's the fuel for economic activity.
Right. I always remember after 9/11, W made his famous speech and said, get back out there and go shopping again. And I thought, well, I guess that is important.
Well, I mean, politically, that may not have been the wisest thing to say, but economically, it's completely accurate. And if you look back to what happened around 9/11, and I was in New York, and Brown Brothers Harriman's offices on that day were about 3 blocks away, so I had a front row seat to a lot of that. About 10 days later, people went back shopping. Russ, it was remarkable to see New York City real estate post 9/11 stopped on a dime for about 2 weeks and then roared back. It's a testament to the resilience of the nation. It's a testament to the importance of personal consumption as well.
Okay. I want to ask you about China too. We know we live in a very global economy now too, and there's these trade issues, the tariff issues. At the same time, there's sort of a feeling that China is discontinuing to grow, and what impact that might have on us.
There's no question, if you look at the headline data, that Chinese economic activity is slowing down, and that's given rise to a certain amount of anxiety about the impact that China will have on global economic activity. I think what we're actually seeing in China is a rare example, maybe a unique example, of an emerging economy actually emerging, actually making the transition to a first world, globally competitive economy. And it's hard to put that into context because it's never happened before. You can't say, oh, this was like the time that XYZ made the transition, because there's no answer to that. Most emerging economies remain emerging economies forever and ever. Amen. But in China, what's happening is they have a demographic reason to make that transition. 1.3 billion people in a rapidly aging population without the national safety net that a developed economy like the U.S. has. There are no Chinese words for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Affordable Care Act. This is a source of civil unrest unless the Chinese government finds a way to get enough wealth to begin to create some of those national safety nets. Now, historically in China, it's been family. It's a very family-oriented society. But one of the impacts of the one-child policy is you've got individuals with 4 grandparents and no siblings, and that pyramid is inverted, that support pyramid. So China's got a generation to get rich before it gets old. That's why they have to make the transition. What that implies is that they're not going to grow at 10 or 12%. Developed economies don't grow that fast. They grow at 3 or 4 if they're lucky. Chinese economic activity now is about 6%. I think it's on a glide path down to something like 3 or 4%. We should welcome that. We should welcome China as a competitor on the global economic stage with a leveler economic playing field. And although it's controversial, I actually think that'll be the outcome of these talks on trade with China. The fact of the matter is China continues to compete under a series of trade deals that were completely appropriate 15 or 20 years ago when China was truly an emerging market. times have changed. They're a $13 trillion economy, still growing rather rapidly. The trade deals need to come up to date. That's all the White House is trying to accomplish in fits and starts. I wish they weren't using tariffs to do it. That's the tool that the White House has chosen. I think the outcome of this is rather benign. We arrive at a new set of trade agreements with China that allows them to compete, allows us to compete on a leveler playing field. That'll be good for global economic activity, not bad.
And do you think the Chinese know everything that you just said?
They do, Russ, because they think in very long term. In the very long term. So at the risk of stating the obvious, American politicians, for the most part, find it hard to think beyond the next election. Chinese Communist Party thinks in 5, 10 year, 5 or 10 decade plans.
Because they'll remain in office.
They will remain in office, right. The Chinese government publishes a 5-year economic plan. They've done it sort of every 5 years since the Second World War. In the West, we're accustomed to hearing campaign promises that go unfulfilled. What's remarkable is when you go back and look at the Chinese 5-year economic plans, they've done them.
They do them. Interesting.
They do them. So I think they'll carry through on this as well, and they think longer term. And they appreciate that they've got some room to give on issues opening up their markets, intellectual property, all the things that the White House is talking about.
Interesting. Okay, so before I let you go, I've spent most of my career in the technology world. And the technology world has been in this disruption mode for at least a decade, depending upon how you look at it. But just in the past couple of years, there's this concern that robotics, artificial intelligence is going to eliminate so many jobs that it's going to impact the economy, all the way to the point where some are even discussing the idea of an allowance for everybody.
Universal basic income.
Is that real?
Yeah. Well, yes, it's real, but it's not new. And here too, I think the history, my experience as a historian comes into play. Arguably, this technological disruption, what economists call the substitution of capital for labor, hire a machine instead of hiring you, started in the Industrial Revolution. I mean, this goes back to the English looms, and remember the Luddites who would storm the factories and break the automated looms because they were taking the jobs away from seamstresses. This is the 18th century. So the details have changed, the technology has changed, obviously, but the underlying economic fundamentals haven't. And the magic, what allows this to happen without destroying human labor, is this idea of creative destruction. That if we allow entire industries to be disrupted by technology, but in a creative way, it creates whole new jobs and even industries that were previously unheard of. I had a conversation on a panel with a Navy, an Air Force officer a number of years ago, and I asked him about the economic impacts of the unmanned aerial drone program, which at the time was very much in the news. And I said to him, so how many jobs does that cost? There's not a guy or two guys flying a plane anymore. And he said, oh no, I said, you've got it completely wrong. Yes, there's now one individual in Tucson, Arizona with a joystick flying missions in Afghanistan. But the amount of data that drone is pulling and the amount of analysis that has to take place, employment in that unmanned aerial drone program has gone up by 20%. And the payroll for each of those people is higher because they're trained PhDs, training and analyzing big data. So that's an example, one example, but as long as we let that creative destruction be both destructive and creative, it actually creates whole new jobs. And the proof statement for that is so much technological disruption over the past decade or so, unemployment in this country, 4%. And they're good jobs. I mean, it requires training, requires education, but they're good jobs.
Scott, thank you so much.
Anytime,
really
Russ.
appreciate that.
Happy to join you.
And that wraps up my discussion with Scott Clemons with Brown Brothers Harriman. And this has been another Thought Leader production brought to you by PKF Texas Entrepreneurs Playbook.